Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr, ready to talk some Ohio State football camp. Tom, how's it going?
It's great. We already started our show with a little informal pre-show where we started having a conversation that was like, well, we should probably hit record before we actually have this conversation. So I have a good feeling that I know how tonight's show is going to go, and it's probably going to be pretty good. So you should stick around and listen.
Yeah, that's pretty good. No pressure there, Tom. Thanks a lot.
Off season's over. It's time to get fired up for the season. Come on, here we go.
Camp opens on Friday, but before we get to that, we could talk a little bit of recruiting because, last week when we last talked to you, it sure seemed like Ohio State was going to be adding Jalen Knighton and Bijan Robinson this week, and the first domino fell on Tuesday, and it did not fall Ohio State's way as Florida running back Jalen Knighton has committed to Florida State. This all came about in the last few days. He visited Florida State, kind of a surprise, and when that did, you started seeing crystal balls flipping to FSU's way, and so he committed there Tuesday evening. Bijan Robinson, there's been a bunch of smoke about Texas. I think Texas is maybe now the crystal ball leader. The Ohio State flip has been happening with those projections, and I think maybe USC might be a player in there as well. But we almost had these two guys just as part of the class, Tom, when we would talk about them, like they were part of the 2020 haul. But now you're looking at a situation where, Bijan Robinson's not out of it yet, and we don't even, if he is still going to commit on Friday, we'll see what happens. And even when he does, if he does commit to, say, Texas, we'll see what Ohio State does from there. But this is the first blip or the first, skip of a beat of the Ryan Day recruiting era, Tom. So, where does Ohio State go from here? Do they continue to go after these two guys? What do you see happening now?
I'm sure that they're going to keep in contact with both of those guys. There's a long way to go to even the early signing day. That's still 5 months away. So there's a long way to go till there. And for interest to have flipped in the span of a week, that's a pretty good indication that there's a chance that interest could flip back at some point. If it's a disagreement with family members, then, maybe they come visit Ohio State later in the fall and that gets kind of smoothed over, or concerns get assuaged, or whatever it is. And even if they don't end up with either one of these guys, they have other options on the table. This is early enough in the cycle that this is not the end of the world. I know everyone is running around all weekend with with their hair on fire about how the sky was falling and everything was terrible. And it's not great. It was not a great week on the recruiting trail for Ohio State, but the fact that these two happened on the same day probably makes it feel a lot worse than it really is. There's plenty of time for them to get this sorted out. It's much better that you have that kind of, surprise flip happen in July when you have 5 months to adjust to it, than in December, like when Dwan Mathis flipped basically on early signing day last year. And then it was like, well, now they don't have time to find a quarterback because everyone else is signed. Like now they have an entire fall, half of a summer to kind of go through and figure out some plan Bs. And there are some other options out there. So I wouldn't freak out just yet.
If we go to practice on Friday and Brian Hartline is not there, should we assume that he is in Arizona visiting the Robinsons?
I don't know what else you could possibly assume. I think that's pretty clearly the only possible explanation.
We probably should have realized that Ryan Day is flying too close to the sun going after a 5-star running back like Bijan Robinson. And again, we're just, speculating like if he doesn't end up in this class. Ohio State hasn't signed a 5-star running back since Beanie Wells in 2006. The only other one of the internet era was Maurice Clarett in 2002, the only other 5-star running back Ohio State has signed. That's insane. Georgia has signed, I believe, 8. I put a whole spreadsheet together. Georgia has signed 8. I think USC has signed 8. 5 of those happened in a 2-year span, which is stupid. Like, not like stupid, ridiculous, crazy, like stupid, dumb. You know, why keep following all of these other 5-star running backs, and pretty much none of them really panned out. But it's so odd that Ohio State can't get these 5-star running backs. They do fairly well without them, but even looking back and when they had Boom Herron and Brandon Sane, Boom was a very good running back, but that was like the best they could do, and those were 2 Ohio running backs. Demario McCall is one of the closer to 5-star status running backs Ohio State has signed. He's obviously an Ohio guy. Brian Snead was close, but we know that didn't pan out. It's just odd, Tom, that they can't get these guys to come to Ohio State when you think back, and probably I'm sure Robert Smith was like a 5-star back then, but he is another Ohio guy. It's just odd that they don't have more success, considering what you tend to think about Ohio State in terms of what they produce on the field. Running backs is what that's one of the things they're known for, and yet recruiting them, at least at the elite levels, the blue chip 5-star levels, has not been easy, not been a thing.
It has been a little bit spotty in terms of 5-star running backs, but I think there's a couple reasons for that. One of them is there just aren't that many 5-star running backs. I mean, just if you go back to the 247 composite in 2018, Brian Snead was the number 3 running back in the country, and he was a 4-star. There were 2 5-star running backs that year. And I think the key thing to look at is where those guys are from, because there's not very many of them. So everybody's going after them. And in 2018, the 2 5-star running backs were from North Carolina and Florida. And in 2019, there were 3 5-star running backs. They were from Florida, Louisiana, and Mississippi. And in 2020, there are right now 5 5-star running backs. They are from Texas, Florida, Arizona, California, and Texas. You don't need to be a real geography expert to notice that none of those states are Ohio or states that border Ohio. And the only one that was even remotely close was Zamir White from North Carolina, and he went to Georgia. Mm-hmm. And so when there are 5-star Ohio running backs, it doesn't happen that often because there aren't that many of them. But I mean, you mentioned Beanie Wells, you mentioned Maurice Claret. They got both of those guys. They're not missing on 5-star in-state prospects. Here's the thing about 5-star players. They're real good at football. Everyone knows they're real good at football, and lots of schools are recruiting them. And so you're going to lose out on recruiting battles to a Clemson or an Alabama or places like that for some of these guys, especially if they're from closer to those places. So I don't know that I would read too much into it. It may just sort of be a function of there aren't that many of them. They're from places that are closer to other very high-profile schools. There is no great shame in losing out a recruiting battle to a school like Georgia for a kid like Kendall Milton. I mean, he is going across the country. He's going from California to Georgia, but that's Georgia is a school that is going to recruit at about Ohio State's level, and that's one of those you're going to win some, you're going to lose some kind of things.
It is interesting. You mentioned the lack of just overall 5-star running backs. And so, I went back all the way to 2002 and just to see how many there were, to, tally up who gets what and how many schools have gotten. You can see, like, in 2002, there were 6 5-star running backs. 2005, there were 7. 2006, there were 9. And it's almost like as football has progressed away from running backs in total, in like where it's the quarterbacks and it's the receivers, as football has gone more spread and passing, the maybe the sites are just ranking fewer running backs that high, or maybe they aren't seeing enough of them in high school. I don't know. But Tom, obviously, if there were more 5-star running backs out there, Ohio State would probably have a better shot at them. And so the limited numbers does hurt. And it's been a while since Ohio has produced, a significant blue chip running back recruit. Who's LJ Smith was a 4-star guy, like Tavion Thomas was a 3-star guy. So there's, Diamante Trianum this year in 2020 is a guy who is up there, but that's not, we're talking guys down the list. And in terms of, will the Buckeyes come back on Trianum? Sounds like he's happy. Arizona State does not, at this point, they aren't concerned. We'll see how long that stays. I think anytime it's an in-state kid from far away, no matter what school you are, and then the home school comes calling, you might have to just continue to recruit him as if he was still uncommitted. E.J. Smith is another guy, Tom, all-purpose back out of Dallas. Emmitt Smith's son has been to Ohio State a couple of times. Maybe they turn their attention towards him. But Tom, you had mentioned before the show about maybe a current commit who could also maybe be in the picture here.
Well, yes, one of us mentioned it. This was the conversation we were having before the show started, and we were kind of running down all these different running backs. And Gerd said, "Well, you got to think, they've also got Cameron Martinez in the class." And I just went, "Oh, you're right." And if you haven't watched Cameron Martinez, his highlight films, you should just pause the podcast and go watch Cameron Martinez highlight films. Like he's an option quarterback. He plays for Muskegon High School in Michigan, and he's committed to Ohio State already. He is projected. They recruited him to play on the defensive side of the ball, but if you watch his highlights, it's like there is nothing in there that doesn't look like he could be the DeMario McCall type player. He could be a Jalen Gill type player. Like. He's got speed. He's very shifty. He's projected as a safety, but that's an option for them that I honestly hadn't really thought about until Gerd mentioned it right before we hit record. He is someone who, if you watch his highlights, you could very easily see him in that kind of, speed back kind of role or H receiver kind of role, and that's probably not their first choice because I think they obviously like him best as on the defensive side of the ball as probably a safety. It sounds like is where they're going to start him out. But if all else fails, or if they don't like their other options as much as they might like him, that is a solution that is sitting right there and waiting to happen.
Yeah, because when as people have now returned from watching the highlights. Tell me you don't want that guy on offense. Tell me, like, you watch that and you're like, really? Safety? That's what they see? And, if that's how it turns out, it turns out. But you can envision that guy in the offense a lot of different ways. And right now he's, listed at like 5'11", 190, something like that. They can have him bulk up to whatever they want to be in a situation where they feel comfortable with him. And not all option quarterbacks can turn into running backs, but Jalen Marshall is an example of the option quarterback turned into an H-back who had skills that would allow him to run between the tackles like all option quarterbacks have to do. It's just an intriguing thought, a way to, you look at all of the receivers that Ohio State already has, and it's like, well, there's no room for Cameron Martinez in the offense. Maybe now there is. Or maybe this is something they have in their back pocket if they don't land a Jalen Knighton, or if they lose Bijan Robinson and they have to maybe E.J. Smith is their running back. I know people view him as an all-purpose back, and he's a really good receiver, but he's a normal running back size guy. Maybe he is the running back in the class, and then you've got a guy like Cameron Martinez as the change of pace, DeMario McCall matchup nightmare that every team wants to have and defenses hate to prepare for because it's just one more thing. And as Ohio State and every team in the nation looks for the Rondale Moore type, if you've got somebody like Cameron Martinez just chilling over on defense, and that's going to be a tough pull, or that's going to be tough to just ignore him. Even though you have all of these other options, all of these other offensive weapons, it would just be like tough to just sit on your hands and not get him involved.
Yeah, I mean, he is certainly someone who they could slide over there, and it would be pretty exciting to watch. And it seems like they have a few of those guys on that team already. You look at the Demario McCall, the Jalen Gill type players. They have a number of those guys that are like you can't wait to watch them with the ball in their hands. But yeah, I would put him in that category. It's certainly not anything close to a guarantee that that's how this will play out. They have other options. I mean, you mentioned DeMonte Trayanum as that kind of prototypical running back, as a potential in-state option if they wanted to flip him from Arizona State, if he was interested in that. Because I think the indications at the time were they were looking at him maybe more on the defensive side of the ball, and if he wanted to play running back, you go to Arizona State. And so if they've changed their minds and they want to look at him as a running back, maybe that's an option. And they have a couple options in state on that kind of all-purpose back side as well. Michael Drennan from Dublin is a possibility. And Juton McLean, who's from Fairfield, he's committed to Kentucky, but for an Ohio kid, even a Southwestern Ohio kid, if Ohio State came calling, I can't imagine a Kentucky commit would necessarily be enough to just keep him, from even being willing to listen or think about an opportunity to play with the Buckeyes.
Mm-hmm. And Michael Drennan was at Florida State this weekend, along with Jalen Knighton. And so I was told Florida State talked to him about that situation. And I have not heard from anybody that Ohio State is back in contact with Drennan. So we'll see. He's, like you said, an all-purpose back. I'm not sure they were ever really convinced he was a running back. Maybe they thought he was more of a receiving H. But when you get down the board, you have to start to compromise. But then the guys down the board are like, you know what? I'm okay going. Stanford wants me. Florida State said I could do this. Kentucky wants me. Michigan State is okay with me. And that Ohio State poll only goes so far if that first interaction or the main interaction has been one of like I feel like I've been disrespected, or you've shown me your cards because you didn't lock me up when you had the chance. You didn't sell me and take me when I was maybe interested in it. And that's one of the things with Diamante Trayanum, where we've talked on this show that if you're going to let him go to Arizona State, you must feel really good about Bijan Robinson, which they clearly did. And, this is still one of the results of that. So we'll see how things play out. It's not December yet, so there is still time. And other names will come about.
Yeah, and it's not December yet, and new names will probably come about. And also, they're not in terrible shape at running back right now.
Yeah,
I think the assumption is J.K. Dobbins will leave after this year. Demario McCall could leave after this year, although that's probably less than 50-50. Even if both of those guys go, you still have Master Teague, you still have Steel Chambers, you still have Marcus Crowley. And again, it's probably better than 50-50 that you have Demario McCall again next year. That running back room is not exactly stripped down to the studs after this year, even if they don't land a 2020 player, and even if they don't have J.K. Dobbins next year, that's still, you have a very respectable pair and a spare there already. Plus, you've got presumably Demario McCall there, and offensive skill talent is never in short supply. I mean, there are probably guys in that in that H conversation that they could slide over to running back if they wanted to, in the same way that they've kind of moved Demario McCall from receiver to running back. There is plenty of offensive skill talent on that roster next year. Even if they somehow don't sign a running back this year, they obviously would like to. You want to keep that room well stocked, but they're not anywhere close to the disaster zone, even if they don't sign someone this year.
And keep in mind, they didn't really get after Marcus Crowley until October of last year. So they had Samson James committed, that kind of fell through, and then they're like, they put all of their focus on Marcus Crowley, and it took about a week, and they got it done. So there's time, there's players that can still develop and come through the senior season type of thing, but it's an interesting development nonetheless. But Tom, we can't keep talking about it because camp opens and neither one of us wants a 4-hour show. And well, maybe you do.
Nope.
No, you don't? Okay. So camp opens on Friday. We will be there Friday morning, and then we'll get to see like the first half hour, and then we'll be sent inside to talk amongst ourselves, and then we will talk to Ryan Day and, quote, select players. And then we will do a show after that, a quick recap type show. We get one full practice viewing, and that is Tuesday, August 6th, because the Big Ten Network is there that day, I believe. And so we will get to see all of that. And we thank the Ohio State Sports Information Department for allowing us, granting us this opportunity, right, Tom?
Absolutely. We'll Friday morning we'll already be ahead of where we were for basically all of fall camp last year. So that'll be just dandy with us.
Knock wood. So it's every 2 or 3 times a week we'll be talking to coaches and players. So we will have plenty for you guys each week, and maybe let's see. I'm looking here. We've got a Tuesday availability. That's a word. Availability with Brian Day on August 6th, so we can do a show that evening. We'll have stuff to talk about. We do have a couple of Wednesday availabilities in August, and maybe we'll do Wednesday shows that week, and maybe just release them without all the musical accompaniments later that afternoon. We'll see how it goes, but camp is finally here. I hope you all have made it through this long nuclear winter. And so now let's just do a camp preview position by position. We don't need to go into crazy depth because there are some things I don't know what else we can talk about in terms of the quarterbacks and the linebackers, and because we've been talking about them since we got back from the Rose Bowl. But with the quarterbacks, Ryan Day says that's one of his 3 biggest concerns. And yeah, there's a ton of question marks, but is there really? We talk about there is going to be a quarterback battle, and a lot of people don't believe that. But if Justin Fields, as I've said before, if he stinks, he's not going to start unless everybody else stinks worse. But I don't expect that to happen. I assume you don't expect that to happen. And so, yeah, there's a lot of question marks. But I think camp is going to go, Justin Fields gets better as camp goes along, establishes himself as the starter. They like what Gunnar Hoak brings them, and they like the experience that Chris Chuganoff has. And they'll move forward with Justin Fields in 2 weeks as the starter, and they'll be getting ready for the season opener on August 31st. I feel like that's how camp is going to go.
You probably should have said spoiler alert before you said that, but that's all right. That ship has sailed now. That's all right. That's probably exactly right. It's there's not much question. I mean, yes, the job is technically still considered open. I don't think there's a ton of doubt who that starter is going to be when they kick that ball off on August 31st against Florida Atlantic. It's going to be Justin Fields, barring injury or barring something really crazy happening during camp, because Fields has, if you just look at the recruiting pedigree, he is ahead of everyone else in that room. He has been, Gunnar Hoak, who's the presumptive backup, just got to Ohio State. He didn't go through spring ball, so he's kind of a little behind the 8 ball in that kind of in that way. And quarterback is, Ryan Day's right, quarterback is kind of one of the big question marks. But the question mark is not who, the question mark is how good, because Justin Fields could play and be just okay, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to expect because this is his first year starting. He just got into the system this spring. This is not the easiest offense to pick up immediately. And we saw incredible arm strength. We saw great speed from him. His accuracy was just okay in the spring. It wasn't amazing. This is not a Dwayne Haskins level accurate arm. And if he turns into a Dwayne Haskins level accuracy passer, then the ceiling for this team is about as high as you can imagine. But there's questions as to whether he'll get there or whether he'll get there immediately. And So just how fast he kind of picks everything up and just how accurate he ends up being this fall, those are the kind of questions that that is a very reasonable thing to be thinking about and wondering about, because that's one of the biggest things this whole season is going to hinge on.
I feel like it's unfair to compare him accuracy-wise to Dwayne Haskins. And during camp, Buckeye fans and probably Buckeye media, definitely, we should all just go and watch JT Barrett in like 2016, 2017 and see like your typical quarterback accuracy and gauge what Justin Fields does based on that. To compare a new starter, a true sophomore, to the most accurate quarterback in Ohio State history is completely unfair. And yet, I think that's what is going to happen because, Dwayne Haskins, that's the norm around here, but it's not. It's never been the norm, and that's why it stands out so much. And people, I just think we all need to remember that Dwayne Haskins was special, and Justin Fields may be special. He's probably just not going to be as accurate.
Well, he's special in kind of different ways. He's got probably a very similar level of arm strength to Dwayne Haskins, which is a very abnormal level of arm strength. Dwayne Haskins was an outlier in that area too, and Fields sure seems like he can basically come close to matching Haskins in that area. Fields is also much, much faster than Haskins was. Fields is a runner. Fields is a threat with his legs in a way that he is faster than JT Barrett, I think, pretty unquestionably. Mm-hmm. And so the offense is going to look a little different than it did last year. Just how accurate he is, like where he ends up on that, 2011 Braxton Miller to 2018 Dwayne Haskins, like where he fits on that scale is he'll be somewhere in the middle there. It's just a matter of where he fits in there. That's gonna be one of the big question marks this fall.
And I say all of this about Justin Fields, talking about how he's not going to be as accurate as Dwayne Haskins, but he is a very good thrower of the football. And I think sometimes people get distracted by his speed and athleticism. He's like Carl Lewis. He's like super fast, but he's also a very good singer. And I think a lot of people forget about how good he can sing. And if you don't believe me, just Google Carl Lewis National Anthem. And so, I think people maybe just, they see him do one thing well and they forget that he can also do this other thing very well. And, don't be surprised if Justin Fields, the thrower, is as good or better than Carl Lewis, the singer.
You know why this show works? Because as soon as you said Carl Lewis, I said, oh, good, I can make a joke about something about singing. And then you made the joke too. So that's why this show works, because we are both strange and broken as human beings, and it all just kind of fits together nicely.
Right. It also works because nobody is making us stop.
Until someone comes in here and sings to us and sings the national anthem to us and makes us turn off these recorders, this show is going to be just fine.
So running back, the story for me watching this fall camp, and we saw it in the spring, they wanted J.K. Dobbins running tougher, and we saw that, and that's going to continue. For me, I want to see the competition to back J.K. Dobbins up, to be the backup. I would love to see DeMario McCall out there, obviously. Let's see what he can do. Let's see him healthy. Let's see what kind of excitement and addition he is to this offense, because I think it will be significant. And this will be our first chance to see Steel Chambers. I don't expect him to compete for the backup spot, but this is, he'll still get some opportunity. But I want to see Master Teague, who was banged up a little bit in the spring. This is his opportunity. This is, Marcus Crowley, his second camp he was in for this, during the spring. I want to see the competition to be that number two guy, because there could be considerable number of carries for the number two guy. And the one thing we do know is there's rarely carries for the number three guy, especially with a running quarterback. So whoever does not win that job to back up J.K. Dobbins, you're going to have to hope you can find a way to be like Demario McCall. Like if Demario McCall gets beat out by Master Teague, I think there's still a spot in the offense for McCall. I don't know if the opposite of that is true, or how true that would be. If Demario wins the backup, how many carries are there for Master Teague, or how many opportunities? So if you want the ball this year, you better be the backup, because as we've seen every year, especially with the running quarterback, the opportunities for the number 3 guy just are scarce and usually come in the fourth quarter of blowouts.
Right. The third guy is, unless one of the top 2 guys gets hurt, the third guy ends up finishing with like 250 or 300 yards. Like that's about where you end up as that third running back. The second running back, the last couple of years, when it's been that kind of J.K. Dobbins, Mike Weber tandem, that second guy can end up in that 600 to 800 yard range quite easily. And if they had been able to stay healthy last year, there was a decent chance both of them could have ended up at 1,000. So you're right that there's a pretty big drop off between being number 2 and being number 3. But again, like just like last year, they got to stay healthy. That's the question. Can Demario McCall stay healthy? He has been someone who I think everyone has been itching to see get the ball on a regular basis for the entire time he's been at Ohio State, and he's just kind of been injury plagued for, with one thing or another for quite a few years. So if he can stay on the field, like he's someone that I would put right at the top of the list of the people I'm most interested to see this fall. What does he look like? Can he stay healthy? Can he stay on the field? Because if it comes down to if Teague and McCall are both healthy, then that running back room has what? If those 3 guys are healthy, that's what, 3 of the 10 best running backs in the Big Ten, maybe? I mean, there's not that many guys I would take ahead of those 3.
Yeah, and you think and I've done this in the past where I do like a Big Ten draft, and I go through and like you go from last year's standings. Like Rutgers would have the first pick in the draft, and of any available Big Ten, any other Big Ten player, who's the first draft pick, and usually it's Joey Bosa, Nick Bosa, stuff like that. And you wonder, how far down the list and how many rounds would it be before like all of the Ohio State running backs are gone, and especially Teague and McCall as those 2 guys vying for the backup. Are you, I have for each of these positions, are we expecting any surprises? I don't know if there's enough here, enough guys or enough unknowns for a surprise. I think, I don't know that Steel Chambers as maybe like a big back could surprise, but Master Teague at 220 pounds, maybe he's the power runner. J.K. Dobbins is nearly 220 pounds himself. So I don't, kind of like the quarterback situation. Yeah, there's some unknowns, but you kind of think how things are going to go. And I don't really see I can't come up with any surprises that we might encounter during camp at running back. Xavier Johnson?
Yeah, I mean, Xavier Johnson's a walk-on who kind of flashed in the spring and looked pretty good. But yeah, I mean, I would be very surprised if anyone outside of the 3 guys we named earlier, Dobbins, McCall, and Teague, if any of them had more than 300 yards rushing, something like that. There is talent, there's depth in that room, but there's also there's only so many carries, and Dobbins is, if Dobbins is healthy, he's going to get the bulk of them. And it's pretty likely that if McCall and Teague are healthy, they're going to be kind of that next tier. And it's not a terrible thing that you don't have to throw a true freshman like Steel Chambers or Marcus Crowley into the rotation right away. I mean, we talked about Michigan's running back depth issues a couple weeks ago, and they have a true freshman who looks like he's going to be a pretty major contributor. And they have a former walk-on who looks like he's going to be in that kind of top 3 rotation. The fact that Ohio State has true freshmen and a former walk-on who all of them, look talented and look like they are going to be contributors at some point, but that the fact that they're not in that kind of top 3 probably during the course of the year, that's a good thing for Ohio State, that they have that kind of talent and depth at that position.
And if they are going to miss out on a running back in the 2020 class, it wouldn't hurt to have a one guy that you redshirt, or maybe even 2 guys that you redshirt. And now that you can do the whole 4-game thing, it wouldn't be surprised to see both of them redshirt, just like Brian Snead and Master Teague did last year. Both guys played a little. At least I always get Master Teague confused. I think he redshirted, or at least they're calling him a redshirt. But so there's a way to get that done. Let's go to wide receiver, where you lose 3 fifth-year seniors, but you have 2 fifth-year seniors, 2 4-year seniors, 2 3-year guys in Jalen Harris and Elijah Gardner, and Chris Olave. You got some freshmen. You've got a lot of interesting guys. We know that in the spring, Brian Hartline put Austin Mack over at Z, moved him from X so that they could get Mack and Victor on the field together. And then also you've got KJ Hill at H. And this is a question from the forum, wondering if speed is a concern. When you've got, and I took it as when you've got those three on the field together, is speed a concern? Because Austin Mack isn't as fast as the Z's last year. Benjamin Victor, I think Mack is probably faster than him, but so now you've got maybe a little bit of a slower X on the field more. And then KJ Hill obviously is not the fastest guy, but he's good. So it's not the fastest group of receivers, but also they're not going to be out there all the time. And I'm still not convinced Austin Mack is going to be a Z all year long. So speed a concern? I think all of those guys have shown that they are fast enough. Benjamin Victor looked fast enough against Penn State running through their defense, even though it maybe took a little while to get there, but he had a long way to go and, plenty of obstacles to dodge. But I don't know, Tom, do you see speed being a concern either with those three guys on the field together or just overall, which seems, I don't want to say odd. It seems odd to say.
I don't view that as a real big issue for this team. And one of the big reasons is they're not just going to play 3 receivers. Even if you do assume that those 3 are the starting X, H, and Z, Ryan Day talked at Big Ten Media Days about the fact that he wants to have like 6, 7 receivers in that rotation. And among those 6, 7 guys, there are a whole bunch of speedier receivers. I mean, Chris Olave looked plenty fast last year. He's going to be at the Z spot. Jalen Gill is probably one of the guys at H. I mean, CJ Saunders at H. You've got other guys who are plenty fast, and you're probably not going to have Victor, Hill, Mack out there as the 3 guys all the time. And even if they're out there together, like, you don't have to. How often did Ohio State throw it 60 yards downfield last year? I mean, even when you had fast guys out there, it was a lot of short crossing patterns, and then someone misses a tackle, and you saw. I mean, like the Nebraska game, KJ Hill did just fine. He took a short crossing pattern and ran it 30, 40 yards for a touchdown. You saw that with Chris Olave beating people over the middle in the Michigan game. Like, there are plenty of guys on this team who have the ability to do that, even the quote unquote slower guys. And you have a whole nother level of talent with, Garrett Wilson, who he sure looked explosive when we saw him during the spring. So he's someone who they're going to kind of end up working into the rotation as the season goes along. There is plenty of speed in that room. And, if you're not necessarily going to have KJ Hill be the guy who takes those little Paris Campbell toss sweep kind of, jet sweep pass kind of plays. That's probably not KJ Hill. They have other guys in that room that can do that just fine. That would be a great place to use DeMario McCall. That would be a great place to use Jalen Gill. Like, there's plenty of speed in that room. They will have plenty of chances to deploy fast guys to run into the end zone this year.
Yeah, I see Jalen Gill replacing Paris Campbell on those sweeps. KJ Hill's fast enough to do what he is asked to do. Garrett Wilson, I believe, I think I saw where he's like a 4.6 guy at the opening or whatever, and I don't care about Garrett Wilson's speed because it doesn't seem to hinder him if he's quote unquote only a 4.6 guy. He does everything else at 4.3. You know, his hands are 4.3. His timing is 4.3. He is. I have no concerns about his speed. So I think they'll be fine. I think they could become more explosive this season just because of the improved play action passing, thanks to the improved running game. And really, Dwayne Haskins didn't go deep all that much, and maybe they'll do that more this year with Justin Fields, especially on scramble plays, where that's one of the bailouts is to run deep, and I'm sure Fields will be looking for that. And you're a lot faster when you run deep when you're not expected to. So, like when the defense has his eye on the quarterback and you take off to go deep, you're pretty fast. So they'll be all right. Wide receiver is not really one of my areas of concern, Tom.
No, I don't think that's a real big concern at all. I mean, and Garrett Wilson's 40 time, whatever it is, I go back to watching some of those spring practices where it was just like the individual drills, and you just watched him just catch like a 10-yard curl, and he just catches it and just plants his foot, and it's just gone. And it was like, it's almost impossible to stand out in individual drills, and he did it, just how fast he is up to top speed. And so he may be one of those plays faster than the stopwatch time kind of guys, just from that angle. And again, remember, this is something we've discussed a couple times in the past, but he is not someone who's played football full time, basically at all. So he's probably has a chance to unlock some additional talent, like even maybe more so than most of these guys who are maybe a little more experienced in football. So, and you know, you've got guys like Jamison Williams, who's plenty fast. And well, now that you've watched Cameron Martinez's highlight video, go watch Jamison Williams high school highlights and tell me you're concerned about the speed in the wide receiver room.
Since you mentioned Jamison Williams, if you watch him, you know how the NFL Network during the draft, they'll do the superimpose the 40 times. You can superimpose Ted Ginn and Jamison Williams highlights, and I'm sure they match up somewhere. And, you know, the running style, and it's just really impressive to watch what he does, and we'll see how quickly that happens at Ohio State. He's another guy I'm looking forward to watching during camp, because you just like to see those guys who are, you know, they're different when you watch them. And that's one of the things we see out of Garrett Wilson. He may be a 4.6 guy, but he gets in and out of his cuts, out of his breaks, with the ball, without the ball, like a tenth of a second faster than anybody else. So he makes up for the speed, and he's not slow, so don't worry about that. Yeah, there's a lot of guys that are going to be fun to watch, and Jalen Gill was fun to watch in the spring, and I'm sure he will be again this fall. But Tom, moving to the tight ends, because they are going to impact how much this season we see of the second and third wide receivers. We saw them in the spring playing two tight ends quite a bit. Kevin Wilson said that will continue this season. So that's what I am expecting to see during camp. I think we'll see a lot of Jeremy Ruckert and Rashad Berry out there with Luke Farrell as the number one. One of the questions that we had is Jeremy Ruckert good enough as a blocker to do what Ohio State tight ends are supposed to do, are born to do, are bred to do? And he did that last year. He was, like, the second half of the season, he played quite a bit more, and sometimes it was as that second blocking tight end, like every other tight end in Ohio State history has been. Now they're talking about making that second tight end a pass catcher, which is new. Generally, in the past, the second tight end has been a blocker. And so I think he's going to be able to do whatever you need, and as he flexes out, he'll also be able to block in space, which may help pick up for some of that lack of speed that you'll miss from Paris Campbell. Like if it's only Jalen Gill running a speed sweep, and you've got Jeremy Ruckert out there blocking instead of another receiver, that should help. I think he's going to be really good this year, and who knows how many catches, but I think he's fine. As last year was his first year ever as a tight end. He was a receiver in high school, had to learn all of that, had to get stronger. He's a natural, talented athlete. He picked tight end up pretty well and played. And if you continue that trajectory to where he should be this year, Tom, he's another guy to watch during camp. He's going to play a lot. He played a lot in spring camp, and I expect him to have a good camp here next month.
Yeah, the question about him and whether he was going to be good enough at blocking to play, I think that was the question this time last year. Yeah. And it felt like that got answered pretty quickly. I have not heard any real concerns about his blocking from anyone since, I mean, basically almost the start of last year. Like he came along pretty well and played enough last year. They didn't redshirt him last year. He played enough to you burn that year of eligibility, and you're not going to play if they don't trust you to block. Like that is a very easy. Sometimes you'll have coaches say stuff and it's like, oh, do they really mean it? Well, if he played enough to burn that year of eligibility, they wouldn't have done that if they weren't comfortable with his blocking. And you saw him blocking in goal line formations and that kind of stuff. I mean, he played at times when he was purely in there as a blocker. So I don't think that's a concern at all. He does give them some flexibility though. You mentioned flexing him out. As Ryan Day is talking about using a 6 to 7 wide receiver rotation, I wonder if maybe he fits in there somewhere. That he's another kind of big body they can put out there, and maybe split him out on third down and have him run a little cross, or split him out in the goal line situation and have him just go up and go get the ball, because he's a big target. He's 6'5", 250. So that's you get him out on a cornerback or a safety. That's a mismatch just size wise. So yeah, I'm expecting a pretty big step forward from him this year. That's and this is the Ohio State football tight ends step forward. So, that could be 250 yards receiving and, a handful of touchdowns, and that'd be a pretty good year. But yeah, there's with Luke Farrell and Jake Hausman and
Rashad Berry.
Yeah, with some of those other guys in the room, there are going to be, they're going to have to fight to get on the field, all of them, but He's someone I would expect to see take a pretty good step forward, because he only had one catch last year for 13 yards or something like that. He's someone who I would expect to see take a pretty good step forward this year.
I think the last tight end to play as a true freshman would have been Jeff Hireman back in like 2011. I think would have been his true freshman year. So that's 2010, 2011. So that's, nearly a decade of just constant redshirting, because that's what happens at Ohio State. And so for Jeremy Ruckert to be one of those guys who plays as a true freshman, that's pretty significant. I think Jake Stoneburner even redshirted in 2008, if I'm not mistaken. And he was a superstar tight end signee. Not unlike Ruckert, who, Stoneburner was a receiver, a big receiver who came to college to play tight end. So that was the group, the position group of the off season in the winter. They were the talk of spring, even though if we talk about them too much, people get mad because it's the spring topic, tight ends. They'll be talked about again in the fall, because we'll talk to Kevin Wilson, and Kevin Wilson talks a lot, and he talks a lot about the tight ends, and he talks about them glowingly, and Ryan Day will as well. So they will get talked about again. They will get written about, and there's more reason for that than it's the annual time to talk about the tight ends. So just brace yourselves for that. Fall camp is here. Tight end stories are coming. This is the year. So just deal with it.
People will be complaining about tight end stories the way they complained about Chris Olave pieces in the middle of last fall.
Yes. Yes, the Chris Olave fluff pieces. Yes.
Still my favorite criticism from last year. I don't know. Have we even told the story on the podcast?
I don't know. Go ahead.
They brought Chris Olave out for one of the midweek interview sessions, and he hadn't really done much of anything yet. I think he might have played on special teams or something. And it was before or after the Nebraska game, and one of us wrote just a feature on Chris Olave, and hey, he's coming along, and they think he's about ready to start pushing for playing time. And we got some really angry comments. I don't remember if it was in the comments of the article or on Twitter. Like, why are you writing Chris Olave fluff pieces? when they're barely beating Nebraska and, time for another Chris Olave fluff piece. And then like a week later, he had a touchdown against Michigan State. And 2 weeks after that, he had 2 touchdowns in Michigan. And so that was one of my favorites. So sometimes you can read something into the fact that a certain player is being made available. Like, hey, there's maybe something coming down the pipe. So hang in there and let this play out. Don't freak out and write this off too early.
Good times. Going to the offensive line where 4 new starters have to be found. Fortunately, they get to choose from guys who have started in the past, even though 2 of them, Jonah Jackson and Brandon Bowen, may be competing for a single spot. Wyatt Davis has started 2 games, and he's gone through bowl practices as a starter and spring camp as a starter and the offseason as a starter. So yeah, you're going to need 4 new starters, but there's deceptive experience here, as we've talked about in the past. Maybe the biggest question mark is Nicholas Petit-Frere, who we wrote about him in the spring, having to consume 8,000 calories a day to get his weight up to where he needed it. And I think at that time he was at like 292. He's 6'6". You can play at 292, all right? And I'm sure he's a little bit heavier now and keeping that weight on. He's been working on his strength, obviously, all of this. And so that was one of the concerns from the message board is, has he put on enough weight to be a starter and to hold the job down and to play well? And you look at Ohio State's pass tackles where they're, at least 305. And he's not there yet, but they haven't really ever had a tackle who looks like Petit-Frere, who, as we've mentioned when he was last year, like looks more like a tight end or a defensive end, but doesn't look like he shouldn't be playing the position. And when you stand next to him or sit next to him after the bowl game or the Big Ten championship game, when we talk to him, he's not a small person. He's not a small man. And I never see him and think, I don't know that he can hold up. And, when you look at Javonte Jean-Baptiste as a freshman, true freshman, you're like, yeah, he needs a year. I never really got that from Nicholas Petit-Frere. And I'm not just picking on the French kids, I'm not, but, I'm just going to call a frog. So he's never appeared to me like, yeah, he's not Tom. He just shouldn't be out there. He needs another year or 2 in the weight room. The dude is a big dude.
He's a big dude, and he's got pretty quick feet, and he's pretty fluid, and that's the stuff that you'd be really more concerned about. I mean,
yep.
He's listed at 6'5", 295 right now on the fall roster. That is 1 inch shorter and 15 pounds lighter than Thayer Munford, who's on the other side of the line, and no one has ever had concerns about Thayer Munford's size. So I don't think that's a real big issue. It's the big question with Petit-Frere is, okay, how far has he come since last year? Because we have not really seen him do a whole heck of a lot. He played some in the spring, and obviously we saw him then, but really like going every down and seeing him go against the Ohio State defensive ends, like how is he going to hold up when Chase Young is lined up against across the line from him? And that's not necessarily a completely fair test, because that might very well be the best player he faces all year. But let's see how he does, because we've seen the other person who could slot in at the tackle spot is Josh Allaby. We saw him in the Rose Bowl. We've seen Josh Allaby play just as a backup at one of those tackle spots a few times in the last few years. He started the Rose Bowl last year when Munford was out, and that was like there were no issues with him really at all in that game. He looked, you kind of know what you've got with Josh Allaby. The ceiling is probably a lot higher with Petit-Frere. Allaby's going into his senior year, so you're going to get 1 year out of him. Mm-hmm. But Petit-Frere came in with, obviously he was like a top 10 player in the nation, regardless of position. He's just a redshirt freshman. And if you have that kind of tackle build and that kind of tackle ability, if you're playing, you very well might just be a 3-year player at Ohio State, and you're certainly going to be a 4-year player. Like, if he lives up to those recruiting rankings, he's going to be a first-round draft pick in, maybe the 2021 or 2022 NFL draft. I mean, that's coming sooner than Ohio State would probably like. So if they can get him on the field, I think they would want to make the most of his time in Columbus. But that is definitely one of the position battles that's going to be really interesting to watch, because Munford, assuming Munford is as healthy as we're told he is, that left tackle spot is pretty much secured. So then it's just a matter of does the fifth-year senior win that job, or does the redshirt freshman win that job at right tackle?
And I talked to Jonathan Cooper about Petit Frere at Big Ten Media Days, and I asked him, like, how often have you gone against him? And he's like, I go against him quite a bit. And so I asked him, did it become more difficult to go against him as spring camp went on? And yeah, it did, because Petit Frere got better. He got bigger. He got stronger. And Cooper's told me, you can see the growth. And the thing that he likes about him is that he's a hard worker. He doesn't get down on himself. And so you've got all of these, you've got the tangibles and the intangibles with Petit Frere. And I would be surprised if it's Alabi there instead of him, or if it's Bowen, who, remember, Brandon Bowen began the spring at right tackle, and it was Petit Frere with the twos. I just think I'll be interested to see where Bowen is when camp opens. Not that it means that's where he's going to be when it closes, because the guy is so versatile. But is he immediately at left guard competing with Jonah Jackson, where I assume that's really the other open spot? Or I don't expect Jonah Jackson to be at center. Greg Stadrawa told us back at the Rose Bowl, I believe, that he sees that competition as closed, or having Matthew Jones and Harry Miller there will be enough behind Josh Myers. So I want to. This is going to be our first chance to see Jonah Jackson, the transfer from Rutgers, and see what he can do. I know everybody has high expectations. That might be the best competition in camp if it turns out to be Brandon Bowen against Jonah Jackson. And I still think both of those guys would be the most versatile sixth man you could want. Jackson can play any of the three interior spots. Bowen can play anywhere but center, and I wouldn't even count him out at center. So I'm looking forward, Tom, to watching those two go at it, whether they're at the same spot or not.
Well, this is one of these cases where you don't have a settled offensive line, but they have 7 good options there that can slot in a couple different spots. So there are times when question marks on the offensive line are like a big red flag coming into the year, like, oh, this could be a real problem. And you don't get the sense that that's the way this is sort of shaken out, because they have guys who have shown that they can play at this level at every single one of those spots, whether it's Jonah Jackson or Brandon Bowen. Like, those guys have both played. They have both been starting players in the Big Ten, and they have done just fine. Josh Alabi has done just fine. Josh Myers is, I guess, about as unproven as any of the people who are kind of written in there. But from what we saw out of him, I don't have any real concerns with him. And the way the coaching staff has talked about him for the last 2 years, I mean, even going back to the, like this time last year, or even the spring of 2018, they were talking about being pretty comfortable with Josh Myers even at that point. So there are potentially concerning position battles, and then there are there are some good options here, and however this shakes out, this should work out pretty well. This is one of the latter. This is one of those. This is going to be a position battle, but the options here are all pretty good. And then you've got guys behind them. I mean, you mentioned Matthew Jones. Matthew Jones was a top 100 player. He's the backup center. That's not even really considered a position battle, but he's someone who should be a pretty good player down the line. Harry Miller was a 5-star center. He should be a pretty good player down the line. Like, they have enough depth in that room all of a sudden that is pretty quality depth, that I would think Greg Stadrawa is feeling pretty good about where things stand, especially compared to how it looked like they might be shaken out there like last November or so.
And, Gavin Cupp was with the ones at left guard for most of the spring as well. So there's another guy. It's kind of crazy that Josh Myers has only played a little bit, and being at a very important position like center in this offense. And we're just like, yeah, he's going to be really good. He's going to be fine. And we don't have any, you and I, we don't have to worry about being concerned. We're not coaches. Our livelihood isn't hindering on Josh Myers, but it's odd, funny, interesting that he's not one of our concerns as we look over this roster. And I wonder if, come October, we'll be like, boy, we really blew it on that one, because there's clearly concerns. But I just, you talk to him, and maybe that's not a good way to judge a center. But you talk to him, you talk to Billy Price, you talk to Pat Elflein. These are all guys who just, Corey Linsley, who just exude what what Urban Meyer would call the apex of the offense. They just exude this like leadership, this strength, this attitude. And I never really got that from Michael Jordan last year, who was a quieter guy. And maybe that's one of the reasons why I think Josh Myers has the right attitude for what this offense was missing last year. And he's one of the reasons why I have a lot more faith in the running game, or I have faith that the running game is going to bounce back. And that also includes the other guys on the interior, be it with Wyatt Davis on the right side and either Jonah Jackson or Brandon Bowen or Gavin Cupp or Ryan Jacoby. I think whoever it's going to be, the guards are going to be improved over last year with Demetrius Knox and Malcolm Pridgeon, who, Knox was a battlefield promotion. Malcolm Pridgeon, maybe they fell victim to too many offensive tackle types on the interior. Michael Jordan, Malcolm Pridgeon. And, Greg Stadroa said they weren't too tall to run block. And maybe they weren't, but maybe they were just maybe they were too tackly. Too tackly to be guards. And I don't see that being a problem this year.
No, offensive line, it's just bizarre to say this with a line that has just one returning starter, but I think that is one of the areas that I think there's the best opportunity for a major improvement over the 2018 unit. I mean, it just seems like that was kind of maybe at the root of a lot of the issues that they had running the ball last year, and it just seems like they have pieces there this year that are going to fit together a little better and have a little bit more redundancy, and just be able to open up some holes that they just weren't there last year. You never quite saw the holes you were used to seeing from an offensive line from Ohio State last year. This seems like there's a decent chance you're gonna start seeing that again this fall.
Now, moving to the defensive line, and in particular, we'll start out with defensive end first. I wrote last week about Jonathan Cooper believes this is going to be a very deep group of defensive ends to the point where they can put four guys out there routinely like they did with Bosa and Hubbard and Holmes and Tyquan Lewis. And you've got obviously Jonathan Cooper and Chase Young and Tyreek Smith, and you got Tyler Friday, you've got Javonte Jean-Baptiste, Zach Harrison, Noah Potter, Alex Williams, perhaps redshirt freshman as well. But then, I'm looking at all of this talent and all of these possibilities, and one of the questions from the forum was, is Chase Young the only elite defensive end on the roster? And it kind of just, you can hear the brakes just screeching and everything comes to a halt, and you're like, you know what? Maybe. Jonathan Cooper's he's in his contract year. This is his senior season. I think we all expect a better season from him. Tyreek Smith flashed last year, but never got to the quarterback, never got into the backfield to stop the ball. Tyler Friday had some moments. Zach Harrison, I think we all believe in, but I think he's too young to be elite. Javonte Jean-Baptiste was one of the stars of the spring for me. But again, he's a redshirt freshman. What can you expect from him? Tom, I think we do expect Tyreek Smith to become very good. And I also believe that the move to a north-south upfield attack on a defensive line is going to help the defensive ends. But is Chase Young the only elite defensive end on the roster? I think we may not be able to. I think the answer is yes, and we may not be able to say no just from watching camp. I think it's going to be something that we maybe can't answer correctly. Until you see more, you're not going to be able to answer it correctly. I don't know that camp will show it to us, and if it does, then that's great. But is there somebody else other than Chase Young that you would consider elite, that we can consider elite at this point?
I mean, if you're defining elite as someone who you would consider like a first-round draft pick next year, Chase Young is probably it. Jonathan Cooper could certainly end up at that level. That would not surprise me at all if Jonathan Cooper worked his way into like a late first round, second round, third round kind of NFL pick if he had a good year this year. You probably haven't seen that out of him yet, but that is definitely in there. And there are probably multiple other guys on that defense who I would say are probably going to be at that level at some point, but probably aren't there yet. Like they haven't shown it yet. It's a young unit overall, but is that a loaded, very, very talented unit. You ran through the names before, but they have so many guys who came in as like top 100 overall players in the country, and they're all in that room, and you're not going to be able to see them all because even if they rotate, even if they go 4 deep or 5 deep or 6 deep in the rotation, you're still not going to see all of those guys. So you can't right now call anyone other than Chase Young like absolutely elite and say, yep, that's going to be a first round draft pick next year. But there are other guys in that room who are going to turn into that level at some point before all is said and done.
At defensive tackle, I think maybe the one thing I'm looking forward to most during camp is to see the competition between Ja'Shawn Cornell and Teron Vincent. Cornell being the fifth-year senior, Vincent being the true sophomore, former 5-star guy. And actually, Cornell was a former 5-star guy early on in the recruiting cycle. At defensive end, at one point, he was the number 1 player in the nation in ESPN's rankings, which, as we talked about last week, ESPN's rankings, you know what they are. But Cornell kind of, I believe, left the spring as the number 1 at the 3 tech, and Vincent was behind him. I see that kind of, no matter who wins that, I see that like a Landers, Devon Hamilton thing where they're both going to play almost the same amount, and they're co-starters like we've had at defensive end. But I still want to see them play well in camp. And then, Tom, the other thing the young guys, the guys from last year, along with Vincent, Tommy Togiai, what's Antoine Jackson up to? Who else? There's so many. Haskell Garrett as a junior now. How are these guys progressing? How do they look in fall camp? How many of them can play? Because, like you said, you can't play them all, and this is where they show that they need to be on the field. I think we agree. Tommy Togiai will be one of those guys, and to be in there with Landers and Hamilton at nose tackle and to take snaps away from one of those two guys, which he will do, that's impressive. And it's a young group that has to be get older this year, and that process begins in camp.
I mean, the good thing about needing to get older is that's something that kind of just works itself out. Like I can say with absolute certainty, this team will be older at the end of fall camp than it is right now. So if that's one of your concerns, that's not a bad one to have.
Okay, good.
Yep, check that one off the list. I'm right with you on wanting to see some of those young guys like Tommy Togiai just coming in as a true freshman and just like boom, he was just on the field. And he didn't play a ton last year as a true freshman, but he played as a true freshman. He played in a unit where it wasn't like, well, we have to have someone, so we're just going to throw this kid out there. Like, he earned his way on the field. He's someone that when you talk to players, like, a lot of times there will be like when you ask, who's the strongest guy in the team, you'll get a couple different answers. Like, Tommy Togiai is a pretty consistent answer when you ask who's the strongest player on the team. And for you to be in that kind of spot as a true freshman, like, yep, that's a pretty good sign. And he should be, with another year of development with Larry Johnson, should be better technique-wise, should be probably a little quicker off the ball. That's someone I'm really looking forward to. And, I mean, Teron Vincent, we saw Teron Vincent towards the end of the Big Ten championship game last year. I think he had a sack or two kind of towards the end of the Big Ten championship game. That's as a true freshman. He came in as a 5-star, which, he's got the recruiting pedigree that you should kind of assume, like, yep, there's probably something pretty special in there if they can develop him. He's someone who, if you're, again, like Tommy Togiai played as a true freshman, Teron Vincent played some as a true freshman, Tyreek Smith played some as a true freshman, Tyler Friday played some as a true freshman. Like, I mean, that's just, those are 4 guys straight across the line that played as true freshmen on a team that was loaded at defensive line last year. So for the chance to see some of those guys now maybe take a step forward from playing to, either being near the top of the rotation or starting, that's pretty exciting. And you have, I mean, like you mentioned, Ja'Shawn Cornell, he's had this kind of strange career at Ohio State where he came in, like you said, he was the number 1 overall player at one point and still finished as a top 100 player in the 247 composite his senior year of high school as a defensive end. And he's just been a little too big to be a defensive end and not quite big enough to be a defensive tackle, even a 3-tech for some of his career. He just kind of bounced back and forth a little bit as almost like a tweener, which is kind of weird. But he, this is a chance for him to show why he had those accolades coming out of high school. And he has flashed it a little bit at Ohio State, but this is, you mentioned this being a contract year for Jonathan Cooper. It's a contract year for Ja'Shawn Cornell too. And so if you have him, if you have Teron Vincent there at the 3-tech spot, I mean, like that, there's a lot of talent there that Larry Johnson has shown that if he has that kind of depth, he'll rotate them. You'll see a lot of them, and that really wears on the opposing offensive line, and that's something that really pays off in the fourth quarter.
You mentioned sometimes not being big enough for defensive tackle. He was that defensive end last year and then has moved back to tackle. When you have him and Robert Landers out there together, that might be some kind of a concern because neither of them are the biggest guy. They're both quick, though, so that's where they would have to make up for it. But the other thing is, like, they're not out there for more than 30 plays. They rotate quite a bit. The defensive tackles won't necessarily be out there on passing downs anyway. So I know on the message board, there was a concern that they might be too small together, but their quickness will, I think, help them. Plus, it's not like they're going to get worn down over the course of the game, or at least they shouldn't. And if they do, then they will get replaced. So that's where the depth helps. And yeah, Robert Landers is not the biggest guy, but he's another one of those guys. We talk about the Big Ten draft, like teams drafting players. He's a guy that every team would love to have. And maybe you only have him for certain downs, but that's all Ohio State needs, because then they, if they want somebody bigger, they can go get Hamilton at 305, 310 pounds. They go get Tommy Togiai at 300 pounds. So they have options, and the reason Landers is a starter is because he's the best option.
Right. Well, he's so quick off the ball. You see him just like fire off the ball, and he's like just zips into the backfield. Like he will have plays that look like the old Tecmo Bowl game where you could just like get that defensive tackle and just like zip past the center. He'll have a couple plays like that. It's like, how does someone that big move that quick? But you're right. I mean, that's a legitimate concern, like a 285-pound nose tackle. That's a little small for the Big Ten. But Devon Hamilton's 25 pounds heavier than that. Tommy Togiai is 15 pounds heavier than that. So, they know when the other team is going to try and run it up the middle. If it's a short yardage situation, go ahead and you want to put the bigger dudes in there. That's fine. You have the bigger dudes too. So They have plenty of options here, and all of them are at least starting to be proven options as well. I mean, Hamilton and Landers for sure, but Tommy Tokia is kind of getting there as well in terms of being a little bit of a proven asset. And if you've got three good, strong, big, proven nose tackles, that's a luxury that most teams can only dream of.
And we're not even talking about Antoine Jackson or Jerron Cage, two other 4-star guys wishing they could play at that spot as well. Tom, let's move to linebackers, where I don't think there's anything more that we can say about the position.
Yeah, just go download one of our previous 17 shows and you will hear our thoughts on the linebackers.
Yeah, I apologize if this is your first time listening to the show, but we just can't. Yeah.
I have nothing to add that is either relevant or true at this point. Like, let's watch a couple practices and see how this all shakes out, and see who's lining up where and how they're deploying people in certain situations, and are they using the bullet and all the time, some of the time, none of the time. Like, we'll have new information just to talk about the linebackers in a few days, but right now I feel like I have said all my words about linebackers that I can say.
You said we'll have new information on Friday, and literally I felt a tear start to come out of my left eye. Like, you mean it? We'll have like new words we can start to use and new information and new knowledge? You promise?
It may have to do with how well they stretch and run.
Damn it.
I'm not sure exactly how much of practice we're going to get to see that day, but we'll see. It'll be something.
What I'll do is I'll ask Jerry Emig or Mike, can just let us please, just so I can, for my soul, just let me see the linebackers just a little bit. Let me see, where's Baron Browning? Is he now at will? We can't possibly do another show without just a little bit more information about this subject, please. And I'm sure it'll work.
I mean, we know Ryan Day listens to the show, so he'll probably have already heard this before we show up on Friday and let them know, like, hey, just, let those guys, those guys hang out.
Heads up, guys.
It's cool.
It's cool.
I'm going to be mostly focused on the offense during fall camp, so I'm going to need their feedback on the linebackers. So if you could just let them watch, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah. So, hey, what's up, Ryan? Cornerbacks. We're almost done, Tom. We've talked about all of these positions so long. Really, for me, I want to see the young guys this in camp, see if any of them emerge. I know Cam Brown was a guy that Jeff Hafley was high on in the spring. Does that continue? We'll finally get to see some action on see a full practice one day and see if Damon Arnett is as good as or plays as well as Jeff Hafley has said he has in the spring. And does that continue in camp? Does Damon Arnett continue to play as well as he did? Well, for me, and just the secondary as a whole, and we can get into the safeties a little bit as well, and just combine them, since they are combined in a room now with Matt Barnes and Jeff Hafley. Where is Jordan Fuller? Where is Shaun Wade? I think we kind of have that answer with Jordan Fuller. We talked about this last week, saying that he thinks he'll be back at free safety at the deep safety spot, which means Shaun Wade is probably at the strong safety spot. Well, that's the safety that covers the slot. And so that may answer the biggest question I have of the secondary, the question that we've had all along. And as we mentioned last week, that's probably the best answer, at least in our opinion, for that safety duo. But yeah, I'll be interested to see where Shaun Wade ends up. Does he get any run at corner? Jeff Hafley has never really latched on to the 3-man rotation thing, so I think that's out the window. Plus, if he's your best option at strong safety, then there's no sense in making him the number 3 corner as well, especially if he's also your nickel. And I think they like what they're doing with them already, and know that they also know, like, yeah, if Okudah or Arnett goes down, maybe they can just move him over to corner and they'd be fine. But I think that's also why, Tom, we need to see the young guys and see if any of them can step up at corner. And then also Josh Proctor at safety is a guy who always seems to we hear his name a lot during practice, even if it's just the 30 minutes. We still hear his name, and so there's still as many unanswered questions as there was before. But really, I think most of this should be settled already. I think we kind of know.
Yeah, the top line defense, I think you kind of have a pretty good sense, and you just ran through it in pretty good detail. And the big question is kind of the next man up, because between Sevyn Banks, Tyreek Johnson, Marcus Williamson, Cameron Brown, like all of those guys. Marcus Williamson's been hurt. He basically missed all of last year, it seemed like. And the other guys were all very young and kind of getting their feet wet. And so this is going to be a real interesting year to see who kind of takes that next step. Because last year you had Jeff Okudah, who had a remarkable freshman year, and that a freshman year that's kind of out of the ordinary for Ohio State corners. And then last year he kind of took that next step and was really in that rotation. The question now is, can one of those younger guys take that next step and get into that rotation with Arnett, with Okudah, be the third guy there, be the fourth guy there? Can that be Williamson? Can he stay healthy? Tyreek Johnson came in as a borderline 5-star, if not 5-star prospect. Can he be that guy? Sevyn Banks, I mean, we saw him on special teams last year with that big block punt return against Michigan. Can he do it on defense? Cameron Brown, I mean, you said it. Jeff Hafley's talked him up a little bit. Let's see what that looks like on the field. And they have Amir Reep on the official roster. Amir Reep is listed as a corner. He has been at safety before. So I don't know exactly how much to read into that, because they have Shaun Wade listed as a corner as well, and I think we're assuming he's going to be a safety. So that's one of those things that's like, well, I guess we're gonna learn a lot more on Friday. Just who is Amir Reep working with? Like that'll potentially answer one of those questions for us. So
yeah, in the spring we saw Reep sometimes once at corner, but most of the time he was at safety behind Shaun Wade, and that's another guy who, the versatility, we could see him at various spots throughout camp. And so one day we might be talking about, hey, Amir Reep is at corner now, so keep an eye on that. And then the next practice, oh, he's back at safety, never mind.
There's a lot of question marks. These are, again, this is a little bit like the offensive line, where you kind of know your top line questions are sort of answered at corner. Like, what you have with Damon Arnett, what you have with Jeff Okudah for the most part, and it's just a matter of how much better are they going to get. Like they are both perfectly good Big Ten corners right now, no matter what Twitter and or the message board may tell you at various points during games. It's just a question of how much better can they get. The real question is, okay, the guys behind them, when Damon Arnett is gone next year, and when if Jeff Okudah goes pro after this year, who are those next guys up? Like, you're going to start getting those answers this fall, and that starts on Friday.
Indeed it does. So that's our Friday. That's our fall camp preview. We hope you enjoyed it. And like Tom said, if you want to hear us talk about the linebackers, go listen to any other show. Literally any other show. Just grab one out of the tape deck and just throw it in there. And I guarantee you there'll be some discussion about the linebackers there. So Tom, let's head over to listener questions, of which we have a few and kind of a long one as well. So, which is fine. So let's go.
First one from @Suncard19. Uncle Herb would have practices where he turned his hat backwards and everyone knew it was time to be intense. Do you think Ryan Day will have an over-the-top move of his own?
He doesn't wear a hat. I don't think I've seen him with a hat. He's a guy that always talks about being the Ohio State head coach is, that's why coaches put the whistle on, or that's why they start out as coaches, is so that one day you can be the Ohio State head coach. So I don't know, maybe he turns the whistle around, but then unless you have a hole in the back of your neck, really there's no good having a whistle back there. I was thinking maybe he could be a bucket hat coach. Maybe one of those, not quite like Nick Saban with the golf hat or whatever, the straw hat like Bobby Bowden, but maybe like a bucket hat. But I don't know that you can really turn those around either, because if you've got the straps under your chin, I think you might start to choke yourself. And that's not the kind of coach you really want. I don't know what kind of over-the-top move he has. Maybe he will take a move from a different 80s movie. I would suggest Footloose. And here's this would be great, Tom. When the coach leads them out of the tunnel, leads the team out of the tunnel, you know how Urban's there and he's all looking like he's got the scowl on his face. I would like to see the players all milling about at the tunnel, waiting to enter the field, looking apprehensive. And then Ryan Day comes tearing down the tunnel and he's like, "Hey, I thought this was a party. Let's dance." And then they tear out onto the field, just like Ren McCormick from Footloose. I think that's what he should do. I love Over the Top. It is an American classic. You can't tell me it's not, but I would go the Footloose route.
You got to be a little concerned about how that's going to play when they play at Indiana. We know they have laws in that state. I'm not sure that's going to work, but we'll see. The only memorable accessory I can remember Ryan Day having last year was the whistle that didn't work during one of his games when he was the head coach. Was that the first game of the year or second game? There was he said he came out and the whistle didn't work and he had to get a replacement whistle for one of those first games. So that's about as memorable as his accessories got last year. So I don't know. I could see him. He doesn't strike me as a visor guy. He doesn't strike me as a straw hat, like Saban kind of guy. So yeah, I've seen him in a ball cap before, but yeah, he just, I don't know. I have not seen the intensity out of him that you necessarily saw out of Urban Meyer, at least yet. And we'll see what that looks like. That's probably not a terrible thing because Urban Meyer's intensity level may have been slightly unhealthy at times too. So
True.
That might not be the worst thing. Next one from @GoBucks1308. Is there any concern with anyone that Day's offense could be too pass happy, resulting in it becoming harder for Ohio State to get running backs? P.S. Probably more likely once Fields is gone and we have more pocket passer types.
I think that is a valid concern, not in that it will not allow you to recruit running backs per se, because we've already touched on the fact that Ohio State can't recruit running backs anyway, and they've been running the ball forever. But I think you've got Day, Kevin Wilson, Mike Yurcich. These are three guys who can fall in love with the quarterback, with the passing game, but they do it when they have an outstanding quarterback. Like Kevin Wilson is doing it when he has Sam Bradford. Mike Yurcich is doing it because he's in the Big 12. Ryan Day did it with Dwayne Haskins. I like any good coach, you're going to go to the strengths. And unless you're Mike Leach, who this is what I believe in. I think Ryan Day talks about his two biggest influences in coaching being Chip Kelly and Urban Meyer. And I don't see either of those guys, Tom, being the pass happy mentor that Ryan Day appeared to be last year. You've got Dwayne Haskins, man. If you don't use him, you're stupid.
I think there's probably a little bit of an assumption that everything is going to just look like the 2018 offense did. And you look at what Dwayne Haskins did, and it was the most statistical outlier of any statistical outlier season, basically in Ohio State history. Like he broke every Ohio State passing record by mid-November. That means that's not how it normally is going to look, probably. You go back to when Kevin Wilson was at Northwestern, when he was the offensive coordinator at Northwestern in 2000, Damian Anderson had 2,000 yards rushing and 23 touchdowns rushing that year. That's because he had Zach Kustok as his starting quarterback. You tailor the offense to the personnel, and if they have good running backs, they're going to give them the ball. And they haven't landed a 5-star running back every single year, but the running back recruiting at Ohio State is going just fine. Like if you're bringing in top 100, top 150 running backs like they do pretty consistently at Ohio State, I don't think that's a huge concern. And if Bijan Robinson had not, sort of changed his mind this week, I don't know if this is as much of a question. And there's not really any indication that the offense is what changed Bijan Robinson's mind. So I don't know that I would necessarily look at this as a major concern. Like it's a possibility, and it probably is one of the things that's making it easy to recruit wide receivers to this offense, but I don't think they're going to be scrounging through the bottom of the 3-star bin for running backs anytime soon either.
You know, Tom, Ryan Day has done exactly what I would do back when I would play NCAA football, and it reminds me of my dynasty with North Texas. And we've got some time, so I can get into it here. But you throw the ball as much as you can your first year, and then you got some quarterbacks that are interested in you. Then you throw the ball as much as you can, and you get some receivers that are interested in you. And then you go and you start running the ball. In year 3, then you'll start to get some running backs interested in you. And then by year 4, you're ready to take over the state of Texas and go 144-0 like I did over a 12-season span. So that's, I believe, what Ryan Day is doing. And it's proven time and time again, actually one time before, and it was me. But, you know, it doesn't surprise me that he would try to do something that I have done, frankly, because he does listen to the show.
This is the insight that he gets from listening to the show. Of course. Why would he question any of it? Come on. Next one from @burner account69. This is over-unders. I'll read this, and you can say over-under, and then I'll say over-under.
Right.
Over-under. Ryan Day preseason camps, 5.
Well, does last year's count? Either way, I'll say over.
Yeah, 5 seems like a very good number because you're not going to, I mean, unless things go completely off the rails, he's not going to get fired after 3 years or maybe even 4 years. So 5 seems like a very good number, even kind of in something close to a worst case scenario. And yeah, I think based on what we've seen so far, everything's so far so good. So yeah, I think over is a safer bet on that. Over under 120 rushing attempts by Justin Fields.
I initially was going to go under, but I think I will go over because that's a 15-game season right there. So that's what, 8 carries a game, and I think he'll be over that. Barely. If
you go back to JT Barrett's rushing totals each year that he was at Ohio State, it was 171 in 2014, and that was just through 12 games. 115 in 2015 when he was kind of just splitting time. 205 in 2017 and 165 in 2018. So he's not going to run probably as much as JT Barrett did, but for him to run as much as JT Barrett did 205 times in 2017, like that's absurd. But he should be, I would guess, over to 120 for this fall. Next one, 45 catches by Ben Victor.
I was just looking at this one right now, and earlier today when I saw it, I was immediately under. The X's don't necessarily get that many catches because they'll be splitting time, and usually they're around like 35, 32, something like that. But if Austin Mack is over at Z and Benjamin Victor's backup is Jalen Harris, maybe Victor plays more, but also the passing that will be lessened this year. They're not going to throw the ball as much, so I think everybody's numbers are going to come down. Like I don't know, maybe KJ Hill will match his number. I don't know. I don't expect Jalen Gill to put up 90 receptions like Paris Campbell did if he's the other H. I don't even know that he and CJ Saunders together, I don't think they would put up 70 as that other H combined. So I will go under simply because I think it'll fall back to the way it was before Dwayne Haskins, where 35 to 40 catches would probably be where those X's, where Victor and Mac will be.
Yeah, Victor had 23 and 21 catches the last couple of years, from what I saw. So, yeah, I think that's a pretty easy under for me. Like, Ben Victor could have a big year this year and still go under that number. So, last year we had the Dwayne Haskins and Austin Mack were roommates, so that was the big tell that Austin Mack might be on the way to a big season. We don't know who Ben Victor's roommate is, so we'll have to ask him about that. But until we find out he's living with Justin Fields, I think you have to bet the under. Chase Young, 14 sacks, over under.
Well, he had 10.5 last year, like he said he would, and this was in a defense that didn't attack as much as this one will. And he did that with 2 bum ankles for 5 games, and he did that while they had to recover from the loss of Nick Bosa, which they never really did. So you take all of that, and yes, he should have 3.5, 4 more sacks, but it's just not a number that normally gets put up. So I'm going to go under just because 14 sacks, what's the school record? 14.5 from Vernon Golston, I think. And I just, 14 is a lofty number, and we talk about it. It doesn't happen. So I'm going to go under.
Last year, he set his goal at 10.5 sacks, and he got exactly 10.5 sacks. And this year, his goal was to break the school sack record. So I'm not going to be a hater like you and bet against Chase Young. So I'll go over that number. And I mean, look, it's entirely possible that he has that Joey Bosa junior season where teams are just double and triple teaming him on everything, and that, the lack of the other elite pass rushing defensive end on the other side of the ball helps them concentrate more on him, and maybe that holds his numbers down. But if Jonathan Cooper can establish himself as on that other side as the guy on the other side, or the defensive tackles can really establish themselves on the inside and maybe keep some guys off of Young, I'm going to go ahead and bet on him and say he gets that record. He sets that sack record this year. Next one, 15 team interceptions. And just for the record, last year they had 11.
Yeah, they had 11 last year. When you're doing the pressed man coverage, you're trying to eliminate throws to those receivers. So intercept, and you've got your back turned towards the quarterback, so you're not going to see the ball coming. When you play off a little bit and bail out, as the Buckeyes are planning to do this year, the opportunities for interceptions will increase. So I'm going to go over here, and it's interesting that the number is 15 because that was a number that Jeff Hafley said, and there's been some confusion where Jeff Okudah was told that Jeff Hafley said that this kind of defense should get you guys 15 interceptions easy, and Okudah was like, I think he just said that about Sean Wade, which you laugh about, but I think more weight is a good thing out on that defense. And so, yeah, I'm going to go over. I should have looked back, like the 2017 or the 2016 defense, rather, with Malik Hooker and Marshawn Lattimore and those guys. I think they were probably in the 20s. It's time to. The 11 last year was bad, and I think 15 is a good number. I'm going to go over.
Yeah, I think I'll go over that as well, because last year just seemed like they weren't forcing turnovers the way they had in the past, and so the jump from 11 to 15 is not that significant. And I mean, like you touched on the press man thing, which is for sure one of the things that will impact it. If they're playing more zone this year, then you're facing, you're not turning and running with the wide receivers. You're kind of keeping things in front of you. You can kind of watch the quarterback's eyes a little more potentially. I mean, that's all stuff that can help. And if you've got Jordan Fuller back in that kind of center field free safety spot, Jordan Fuller he's not Malik Hooker, but no one's Malik Hooker. You have the possibility of him kind of playing that center field spot, stealing some of those. You've got Sean Wade, who's another a safety, who's obviously got, if Sean Wade is in that other safety spot, that strong safety spot, he's got good cover skills. He's got cornerback cover skills. I think over is probably the smart bet there. Next one, 21 fourth down attempts. That's the number that they went on last year. They went 21 times on fourth down last year.
And we know Urban likes to go for it on fourth. We don't really know what Ryan Day likes to do, but he is an offensive guy. You would expect him to be aggressive. I just don't know how many. I mean, this is an impossible question to answer with any type of expectation other than, we think he's an aggressive guy, but we don't even know, will they have 21 opportunities where it's like 4th and 1 on your side of the 50, because that is the formula. Tom, as you are well aware and you bellyache constantly about, Teams should go for fourth down more. But you know what, Tom? Ryan Day is a young head coach, and that's what it takes to go for it on fourth as much as as you should. So, you know what? You've got a young head coach who understands these things because he played video games growing up, and I've always said that's what we need more of, coaches who understand and how to work a clock. Because Urban Meyer had trouble with that because, that dude never played video games. He never played Tecmo Bowl. He never played NCAA football and knowing when to call timeouts. And, there's 8 seconds left on the clock. I could still get a touchdown here. So, yeah, I'm going to call timeout and I'm going to force a punt. Ryan Day, I think, is that kind of aggressive. So I'm going to go over, assuming they have any fourth downs at all.
I think over is the smart bet here for all the reasons you listed. Younger head coach. I mean, he's my age.
Video games.
Yeah, well, he has come of age not only playing video games, but he has kind of come of age as a coach at a time when some of that statistical analysis on going forward on fourth down is kind of coming into vogue a little bit more, and you're not just automatically Kirk Ferencing it and just punting on every 4th and 1 no matter what. So I think that all sort of points towards yes. There were a lot of times that Urban Meyer didn't go for it. I mean, even on 4th and 2 on the plus side of the 50, because he would just say, well, like in that Michigan State game, it was just like, well, just let Drew Chrisman punt it down inside the 5, and Terry McLaurin will down it, and then that'll be it.
That's a real thing.
How good are the Gunners this year? Yeah, I mean, it is a real thing. But how good are the Gunners this year? Are they able to do what Terry McLaurin did? Because Terry McLaurin was, I mean, Urban Meyer said he was the best he'd ever seen. So Urban Meyer was given to hyperbole at times, but Terry McLaurin was probably right up there with the best I'd ever seen too. So he was pretty darn good. So do they have that kind of safety blanket this year in the punting game? Maybe, maybe not. Drew Chrisman's still there, obviously, so that's going to help. But here's the other thing: they have a running quarterback this year. They did not have a quarterback who wanted to stick his nose up in there and just go, run QB power last year and pick up the first down. You probably have a lot more faith in Justin Fields to pick up that 1 yard if you need to, or make a guy miss in the open field if he needs to pick up that 1 extra yard. So I think between all of that, I'm going to say over. Just probably not a ton over, probably not as much as it should be over, but over that 21.
I knew you'd get that last one in there.
Last one, the easiest one on the list. Over or under 0.5 career Big Ten Coach of the Year awards for Ryan Day.
If it's going to happen, it has to happen this year. I think, even though, expectations are high, this is still the only time where it's different. Like there is some sort of question or some newness, some oddity to the situation, which is what is required. So I'm going to go over because he's likable as well. And so, a lot of the media around the country, around the Big Ten, didn't necessarily like Jim Tressel because they didn't believe him. Media doesn't necessarily like Urban Meyer because he doesn't need them. But Ryan Day so far seems like a likable guy, and I think that has some impact. And plus, he's new. But if it's going to happen, I think it has to happen this year. And that just depends on which Big Ten West team goes 10-2, because then it's that team, that coach. But I'll go over. Not with a lot of money on the line, though.
The last time an Ohio State head coach won the Big Ten Coach of the Year award was 1979, Earl Bruce. That was his first year, and they went undefeated in order for him to do it. So, and that was coming off of a couple down-ish years at the end of the Woody Hayes tenure. And, Woody punched out in 78, and they were 7-4-1, I think, that year. I mean, they had lost to Michigan 3 years in a row at that point, and that was not so to go from 7-4 or 7-4-1, whatever they were in 78, to 11-0 in 79. That's a pretty big jump, and that's the kind of thing that they typically look for. And Ohio State doesn't have the ability to jump that far this year. I mean, they went 13-1 last year, won the Big Ten, won the Rose Bowl. So they would probably have to just be absolutely dominant this year. And I don't think that I see that happening. I don't see them just completely destroying everyone and just wreaking havoc across the conference in the way that they would probably have to show, a significant improvement from last year. So I'm going to say he won't do it this year. And then after that, it probably just doesn't happen because, it's Ohio State and you're just doing what everyone else does. So yeah, I'm going to say under 0.5.
And it's like to win it, they would have to go undefeated. But then if they do go undefeated, it just shows that he's not doing a great job because they're just the most talented team. And it reverts back to the old rules. Like you have to do the most with the least. And clearly there is no least here. So you are bypassed. Urban Meyer didn't win it in 2012 when he should have, because that was the bounce back. You can understand, not really, Jim Tressel not winning it in 2002. Iowa went 11-1. Kirk Ferentz with Brad Banks. I think their only loss was in-state to Iowa State. And I'm just going to assume he won it that year. And I'm tired of the Ferentz jokes about the Big Ten Coach of the Year. I'm almost as tired of those as talking about linebackers. But, there's just a difference this year. But again, if they blow everybody out, then it's going to confirm that there is no least at Ohio State. And anybody could do what Ryan Day is doing, what Urban Meyer is doing, blah, blah, blah.
Well, if he does it this year, he's doing it with Urban Meyer's players, so therefore it wasn't really him, and they're, yada, yada, yada. I mean, it's just, you can kind of rationalize it. And someone out of the West, either someone is going to win that Western Division, and it's going to be Scott Frost, or it's going to be PJ Fleck, or like that's who's going to win it this year. And then, if Ohio State goes 9-3 this year or 10-2, and then they go 15-0 next year, then maybe next year. But that's again, you're sort of dependent on, you're still doing it with Urban Meyer's players. So if you wanted to rationalize it away, you could rationalize it away next year too. So next one from @CTGoBucks. Will any players be wearing any special T-shirts that commemorate the occasion on a yearly basis?
I'm assuming this is the check-in day photo shirt Liam McCullough question.
Yes. Yes, Liam McCullough, and Liam McCullough is back this year, so I'm assuming that we will have the Liam McCullough T-shirt inception.
He has tweeted about it, so I'm interested to see if anybody else is wearing a Liam McCullough shirt. Johnny Dixon wore one last year. I think Johnny Dixon last year wore the 2017 edition. It will be interesting, what happens to the shirts after Liam's eligibility. Will he sell them? Will he keep them? What happens with his little brother, Rowan McCullough, who is a redshirt freshman this year? True freshman, redshirt freshman. Will he, if he is a redshirt freshman and he would have checked in last year, will he be following in the footsteps of his brother and continuing the shirt check-in photo day shirt tradition? I think he should. They could become the Bosas of photo shirts. They are already the Bosas of snappers, long snappers. Although the McCretus brothers would have some bones to pick there as well.
Yeah, I think Rowan McCullough is listed as a sophomore on the roster. He didn't play last year. I thought they gray shirted him last year, but he's listed as a sophomore on the official roster, and he was there for all the games in uniform. So, or not like dressed in pads, I think, for a lot of them, but at least on the sidelines for all those games last year. So, but yeah, I think there's a decent chance Rowan McCullough picks up that torch in some way. If you follow him on Twitter, he is a very entertaining follow on Twitter, has made a bunch of pretty amusing videos, as many in that specialist room tend to do. So yeah, I'm gonna guess that Rowan McCullough has something up his sleeve at some point. But I mean, there will be someone. I mean, last year Paris Campbell showed up in a T-shirt with was it a graphic of the five fastest players in college football, and he wasn't on that list or something like that, and that was something he was using as motivation. So yeah, I think the trend is towards more guys doing that. So yeah, I would expect at least a few people showing up in something other than just a plain white T-shirt.
Talking about Jeff Hireman again, I think 4 or 5 years ago, he showed up in a shirt that said F cancer, except F was completely spelled out. And so, it's photo day basically. So he's on camera with this shirt, and Ohio State is like, yes, it's a good message, but how it's put out there. But, shirts are, that's an underrated portion of an overrated day.
How could that day possibly be overrated? Next one, also from CT Go Bucks. Which defensive starter are all Ohio State fans going to be mad at this season, and does their name rhyme with Guff Corland?
First of all, Guff Corland is one of the bad guys in this coming season of Brown Thunder. So just be on the lookout for that. He's a roustabout. He's a no good Nick, trying to steal some land rights from a friend, an acquaintance of Don Brown. So be on the lookout for that. But in terms of the scapegoat, the Donnie Nicky of this year's defense, I already feel bad for Tough Borland. I tweeted out on Tuesday that his 9 tackles for loss last season were the most since Brian Roll for a middle linebacker at Ohio State in 2010. And that wasn't met very happily. And you go back to 2017 where he played well early, and then you look at that defense, and not that he played great after that, but they held like 5 or 6 teams under 100 yards rushing that year, including Wisconsin. They held Michigan to 100 yards rushing. It's amazing to think how stout that defense was against the run compared to last year. And we've already talked, that we're going to throw it all out, but I don't see anybody else on the level of Tough Borland in terms of the scapegoat this year, which has me really rooting for him to play well.
Whoever it is going to be someone that people have already made up their minds about, and then you just kind of get, confirmation bias where you just see the bad things. It's, like last year when people were sure, every time Kendall Sheffield was in coverage, it was like, oh, here comes another pass interference call against Kendall Sheffield. And it was like, yeah, he had like one all year. Like but you just, whenever there was something, it was like, you just remembered it because that's what you were looking for. So in that vein, yeah, I could see Damon Arnett being the guy that, he gives up a 15-yard out and it's like, oh, here we go. Damon Arnett giving up another long pass play. It's like, yeah, well, okay, he gave up 2, but yes, you were mad at both of them, so therefore he's bad, I guess. I don't know. Like he's someone. It's going to be someone who there's a history, and people are just kind of like tired of getting angry about, and so they're just getting angry about being tired about it, getting angry about the same guy. So it'll be someone like that. It'll all be very sane and rational. Last one from @Zadaya. Recalling Zach Boren, who would be the best defensive player, not a senior, to fill in as spot running back in 2020 after Ryan Day gets 0 running backs in this class? First of all, step back from the ledge. It's going to be okay.
And if we would include seniors, obviously Robert Landers, but no seniors. Cade Stover rushed for 1,477 yards last year in high school. When we talk about what defensive guys can play offense, I think the standing rule here is that Zach Harrison should always be mentioned. And sure, he's 6'6" and 260 odd pounds, but are you going to tell him no? Are you going to say, no, Zach, I don't want you to run the football? Look at this dude. Watch him run. Yeah, just put the football in his hands. Yeah, he'd be fine. He'd do all right. It would be fun to watch if nothing else. It would be like the time when Army moved their starting left or right tackle to wide receiver. It's fun. It's an oddity. You pay $5 to go watch it behind a curtain. Who else? I don't know, Tom. Who else you got?
Well, I mean, I think you could take one of the speedy wide receivers. I mean, Jamison Williams is very undersized, but
defensive players.
I wouldn't mind seeing him with the ball in his hand. Oh, defensive players. I'm sorry, I'm not thinking. Well, then you got it. Yeah, then you're just picking one of the corners or one of the linebackers. So
Baron Browning.
I wouldn't mind seeing. Baron Browning. I wouldn't mind seeing Taraja Mitchell just going head to head on some linebacker, just blowing someone up. That wouldn't be bad.
No, that would be fine. Yeah, get him out there. Get my hitter out there.
He's not technically your hitter,
Right.
if we're going to be really
right.
technical about it.
All right, so hey, that's our camp preview show with some running back recruiting talk and some listener questions answered. I think it's a pretty good show. A lot of content there for you. I hope you have a long drive, long commute. Those are the best, and now you can listen to this show once on the way to work and then listen to it again on the way back. And really, it's one of those things. It's like Naked Gun. You need to watch it and listen to it, several times to catch everything. This show is very much like that. Very smart. The second time through, it starts to permeate your skin and your brain. So feel free to listen to this show as many times as you like. It's free each time. We ask, though, each time you do listen to it, rate it, review it, let your family know about it, let your coworkers know, because they have commutes as well, Tom, right?
Assuming they do, yes. And thankfully, today's show is long enough that even if you're commuting to Toledo, we will get you all the way there.
Yeah. So thank you all for listening. We do appreciate the feedback, and we also appreciate that you listen. So we will talk to you next on Friday from the Ohio State campus following practice and interviews, and we will talk linebackers.
Probably not.
Well, she threw away the motel key. I wish it never meant nothing to me. Say well, now say well. Oh yeah. Say well, now say well. If you tell me that tomorrow's alright, we could steal a car.